there's so many things I've tried to decide how to go into this lesson today, how to go into this sermon today, how I wanted to talk about it, because it is such a weird story. As a matter of fact, after my wife read it this week, she came out of the room where she was reading and came down there where I was, and she said, "There are some crazy people in the Bible." Yeah, there are some crazy people in the Bible. So what I decided to do is I'm going to give you two different lessons, but they're both going to go together. I'm going to give you two different, like just a really strange introduction here, or it's going to feel that way at the beginning, and then I think you can understand it. What I want to talk to you today is about how bad can it get. This past Monday night, they played the national championship in basketball, Carolina and Kansas. And there may be a Kansas fan in the room. I don't know, but this isn't about you. I made a joke last Sunday in one of the services, probably the second service, I think, about Carolina and Duke fans. And, so I'm at the age, frankly, that I really don't care. It's not that big of a deal. I never was a Carolina fan or a Duke fan. As a matter of fact, when I was younger, because my dad went to state, I grew up a state fan. And I learned to hate Carolina. That was pretty much my philosophy when I was a kid. And Duke wasn't that big of a deal, but that's not what I want to talk about, whether you like Carolina or don't like Carolina, whether you like Duke or don't like Duke. The thing I want to point out, and I think they did this in the game, I watched the first half of the game, and then I went to bed. When I was done working, it wasn't that important to me, but I'd know who won. But the thing I think they pointed out in the game that I had thought about prior to the game, I actually made a note about it on Facebook, is that Roy Williams was actually the predecessor to both coaches. He was the predecessor to Bill Self at Kansas, and he was the predecessor to Hubert Davis at Carolina. And what I noted particularly about the Carolina team was that them being in the championship game and having an opportunity to compete said as much about Roy Williams as it did about Hubert Davis. Because what you see for 2 or 3 years after a leader is gone is a continuation of that leader's policies, the people that they hired, the culture that they created. You don't just stop with one and start with another and all of the culture from the previous person goes away and you start over again. There's this continuation, there's an overlap that takes place. And culture in a organization, culture in a church, culture in a family, culture in a nation has an impact on how people live. And the leader sets the tone both for the success that he is experiencing and the success that the next person is going to experience. So the older I get, the more I think about that. Because there is going to come a day where somebody's going to come after me. There's going to be somebody who I'm going to disappear and people are going to forget all about me, and there's going to be somebody brand new that does what I do. And the question that I ask myself is, am I creating a culture that the next person is going to be able to succeed in? Am I creating something that the next person is going to be able to find is easy for them to take off? It's kind of like running a relay race. In a relay race, there's this area, it's like 11 yards or something long. It's a specific set of time where they change the baton. And in that space, there's one runner that's slowing down and there's one runner that's getting up to speed, and the success of that team happens in that slowing down and speeding up and the passing of the baton. Is it done well? And if they drop the baton, it doesn't matter how fast they are, guess what? They're most likely going to lose. If something goes wrong, if somebody trips, if somebody falls, if you fall like 5 yards before you get to the relay zone, you can't pass the baton off. And then, you got this problem. And so how you create that succession matters. And if you have a situation where you've created a good culture, it makes it easy for the person who comes behind you to pick up on that. And we'll watch this play out at Duke he's been the coach there. I don't remember another coach. I can remember players like from the 70s, like Jim Spanarkel, right? And Jaminski, didn't they play in the 70s, or at least the early, I think they played in the 70s, I'm pretty sure. See, some of y'all don't even know, like, who is Spanarkel? Mike Jaminski, those were some of the first Duke players that I remember. And Carolina, look, I'll tell you something that's interesting. Carolina is one of the premier jobs in the country, but Hubert Davis is the 5th Carolina coach that Mike Krzyzewski coached against. Dean Smith, Bill Guthridge, Matt Doherty, Roy Williams, Hubert Davis. 5. That's how long he's been there, a long time. And you're going to see this play out. Did he set up a culture that the next guy could succeed, or did he create a situation where the next guy is going to fail? If you've read much about the Old Testament, if you've read for 100 days, guess what you've seen? You've seen good leaders and bad leaders. You've seen some pass off a successful campaign, and you've seen others pass off bondage and being oppressed by some other person because they didn't handle it very well. Great leaders have success after they're gone, and bad leaders leave trouble long after they're gone. And the thing we need to understand is that when leaders are corrupt long enough, nothing is sacred and evil becomes the norm. It doesn't happen overnight. You don't go to bed today and wake up tomorrow and poof, everything's bad. It's just over time, things that once were abnormal become normal. Things that once were out of place, suddenly now everybody just turns their head to us like it's no big deal. And the book of Judges, which we're in today, ends with this line. It says that every man did what was right in his own eyes. When everyone gets to set the rules, no one succeeds. When everyone determines what is right in their own eyes, everybody's in trouble. As a matter of fact, there are plenty of studies when it comes to parenting or business or organizations that children and people flourish, they succeed, they thrive in places where there is some structure, there is some expectations, we believe this is going to happen and this is what you should do. When they're left to do whatever they want to do, when there's no structure in place, and if you don't believe this, ask a teacher right now who's dealing with 2 years of kids not being in school, what structure or a lack of structure has done to education. And so we see that there are some ramifications. There should be some kind of structure. When we all do whatever we feel like doing, whatever is right in our own eyes, there is danger coming. And so in that concept of good leaders create success for the people who come behind them, bad leaders create bad success or bad trouble for the people who come behind them, and corrupt leaders left long enough create things that become normal. We jump into a story that seems abnormal to us. Listen, when we read it, we're going, this is weird. This is crazy. It causes us to get up and go tell somebody, these are crazy people. But the thing I want you to understand is that for this to happen, it was normal, not abnormal. So let's talk about this story. The first thing I want to talk about is love and control are not the same thing. What is your motive? Like, is the person looking out for your best interest, or are they trying to control you? Like, it's not always easy to tell. I'm going to make a confession. So you can see this in a parent-child relationship. You can see this in an employer-employee relationship. You can see this in a husband-wife relationship. Are they trying to control you, or do they have your best interest at heart? And I'm going to be honest. There have been times I was trying to control, and there have been times where I was genuinely looking out for their best interest. But if you only looked at the decision, you couldn't tell the difference. You follow what I'm saying? Sometimes you tell people to do the right thing, but the reason why you want them to do the right thing is for control, not because you care about them. And there are other times where you tell them to do the right thing where they think you're trying to control them. And what you're really doing is looking out for their best interest. Well, this story has some of that. What are they after? Are they looking out for the best interest of the person? Do they really care? Do they love them? What's going on here? It says this: now, in those days, Israel had no king. There was a man from the tribe of Levi living in a remote area of the hill country of Ephraim. One day he brought home a woman from Bethlehem in Judah to be his concubine. Now, just to kind of give you a basic definition of a concubine, they still married a concubine. There still was a ceremony with a concubine. They just had less rights than a wife did. And if you've read the Old Testament, I'm not even sure how that worked. Right? I mean, have y'all ever read the Old Testament and thought women had rights at all? And so they had less rights than a wife, okay? And so he has a concubine. It's a ceremony, but it's not doesn't have full rights. And it says she became angry with him, surprise, and returned to her father's home in Bethlehem. After about 4 months, her husband set out for Bethlehem to speak personally with her and persuade her to come back. Now, I just need to stop right here and acknowledge the fact that either he made her really mad and he needed her to have a long cool down time, or he didn't love her very much because he waited 4 months. Right? Imagine your wife getting mad with you, stomping out the door, and you sitting there for 4 months before you ever go do anything about it. If you can wait for 4 months, your relationship has some real issues. Okay? Like if it's not that big of a deal for you to salvage it in it don't matter, 4 months, whatever. And so I question whether he loved her. Is he going back after 4 months because he's tired of washing the dishes? He's tired of cooking every day. He's tired of having to rake. Come on now, right? Is that why he's going to get her? He's just, I'm tired of doing everything. I need some help. Or because he loves her. I question whether he really cared about her. And we're going to see that in just a few minutes. I question whether he really cared about her or whether he wanted to control her. Now, the right thing was for them to be together. But the question was, did he want them to be together because he loved her, he cared about her, or he wanted to control her? It says, so after about 4 months, her husband set out for Bethlehem to speak personally to her and persuade her to come back. He took with him a servant and a pair of donkeys. When he arrived at her father's house, her father saw him and welcomed him. So apparently she hadn't turned her father against him, or her father was tired of her and wanted her to go back. I don't know which. It don't say, so you can choose to take whichever side you want to. And he says her father urged him to stay a while, so he stayed 3 days, eating and drinking and sleeping there. So his father invites him in, stay, hang out. It says on the 4th day, the man was up early, ready to leave, but the woman's father said to his son-in-law, have something to eat here before you go. So the two men sat down together and had something to eat and drink. Then the woman's father said, please stay another night and enjoy yourself. The man got up to leave, but his father-in-law kept urging him to stay. So finally he gave in and stayed the night. I've wrestled through this because like when you read certain things, you go, just get on to the rest of the story, the rapes and the body parts. That's what we want to hear about. But the thing I wanted to point out here is this is just my take, and it's only a father's take, and I'm going to speak from experience here. He kept wanting him to stay one more night because he felt like his daughter was safer in his house than in the Levite's house. I don't mind them being together. I don't mind them staying together. But if I got my eyes on him, I can keep him from making her mad again, from abusing her, from mistreating her. At least I know they'll be safe. Stay one more night. Stay one more night. Stay one more night. And so he keeps staying. It's, another night. It says, then the woman's father said, please stay another night and enjoy yourself. He changes his mind. He says, on the morning of the 5th day, he was up early again, ready to leave. And again, the woman's father said, have something to eat, then you can leave later this afternoon. So they had another day of feasting. These aren't not a snack. It's eating Lunchables, okay? They're feasting, all right? They're eating some big meals. And it says, later as the man and his concubine and the servant were preparing to leave, his father said, look, it's almost evening. Stay the night and enjoy yourself. Tomorrow you can get up early and be on your way. But this time the man was determined to leave, so he took his 2 saddled donkeys and his concubine and headed in the direction of Jebus, that is Jerusalem. The Levite has a motive. The father has a motive. It's hard to figure out what they are, whether they're trying to control the girl or whether they love the girl. I walk away from the story believing that the father loved his daughter and wanted what was best for both of them, and he felt like staying with him was the safest place for them. The Levite just wanted her to come bid his work, and we're going to see in a few minutes that he doesn't really look after her that highly. But then he goes off. His father says, why don't you stay until the next day? And the man says, no, we're leaving. The father-in-law says, don't leave in the evening. This already tells you that they're not making a wise decision. The morning would have been better because they didn't have headlights on their donkeys. They didn't have street lights, They're going to go out in the dark and they're going to have to walk along. It's a dangerous territory. They can't see. They don't know exactly what's going on. The Levite has to have, because of a couple of things he says later, has to have some idea how bad things are in this region. They made some unwise choices. The father got him to stay until evening, and he left anyway. The Levite took off with his servant and his concubine in the evening. They could have made a better decision. The truth is, and this is for every in-law situation in the room, set your selfishness aside and do what's best for everybody involved. Amen? Because this story ain't going to turn out so well. Here's the second part. Be careful where you are vulnerable. I lived in Lumberton several years. As a matter of fact, I guess 22 or 23 of my first 28 years on this earth. So when I was 28, I moved up here to northeastern North Carolina. I've been here ever since. But 22 of my first 28 years, I lived in southeastern North Carolina. So Wilmington, most of that time, Wallace, and Lumberton. It's funny, I'll mention Lumberton sometimes, and there'll be people who've lived in that area, and there'll be law enforcement who may have worked in that area, and they'll go, boy, that's a place. And it is. It's got quite the reputation. There were a couple of things that I knew about Lumberton before I ever moved to Lumberton. I was an adult when I moved to Lumberton. There were a couple of things I knew. One, as you drove along Highway 74 and you went through Pembroke, they have some mighty colorful houses. And that's not meant as a compliment. And just you could see all kinds of strange colors. It was like whatever was on sale, they went and bought, and they painted their shutters a completely different color that may not match to the house. That was the first thing I knew, and I knew that as an early kid because we'd be riding along. I was like, oh, that's interesting. The second thing I knew is that you did not pull off on the side of the road for anything. If your tire went flat, you just kept right on driving because if I want to be nice here. If they threaten you, if they have not already done what they threatened you they're going to do, you best run because they are fixing to do what they have threatened to do. Now, I said all that to say this. While I was living there, a famous athlete's father, who was raised in southeastern North Carolina, was passing through Lumberton to visit his son, who was in Charlotte at the time. Some of you may know the story. The story goes that his dad, in the middle of the night on Highway 74 in Lumberton, in a brand new red Lexus, decided to pull over and take a nap on the side of the road. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you. If you have lived in southeastern North Carolina more than 12 months and that has been your route, it is 100% sure somebody has told you, don't do that. Like, no, don't. I mean, even be careful what gas station you. Some of y'all are like, really? Like, here's what you need to know about Lumberton. At one time, it had the highest capacity of hotel rooms per capita of any city in the United States, because it is almost exactly halfway between New York City and Miami, and it was the meeting place for much of the drug trade that happened on the East Coast. And so people would come, they'd stay there, they'd spend the night. Yeah, anyway, that's my story. So anyway, like they said he pulled off, he was taking a nap, and he got robbed. Now, maybe that's true. Nobody's ever going to know. I never bought it. Here's why. Like, there are some places you just ain't taking a nap. Y'all with me? If you know, like, and what I just did is I'm warning today several hundred people, if you're watching online, don't take a nap in the middle of the night on the side of the road, Robinson County. It's just my advice. Okay, I'm just trying to help you out. That's just something you need to be aware of. And if he did, fine. If he didn't, fine. But here's what I'm going to tell you. There are some places I ain't pulling over. If my tire goes flat, I'm going to ride the rim until it catches on fire to get to somewhere I feel safe, because there's just some places that I have some experiences with and know a little bit about, and I'm not going there. Well, it says this. It says, it was late in the day when they neared Jebus. And the man's servant said to him, let's stop at this Jebusite town and spend the night there. No, his master said, we can't stay in this foreign town where there are no Israelites. Now, my assumption is he believes that if he knows how bad things are. He knows there are some places he shouldn't stop, but he hopes if he can get to the place where there are people like him, he can stop and everything's going to be okay. And they won't abuse him because he's one of them. It says, we can't stay in this foreign town where there are no Israelites. Instead, we will go on to Gibeah. Come on, let's try to get as far as Gibeah or Ramah, and we'll spend the night in one of those towns. So they went on. The sun was setting as they came to Gibeah, a town in the land of Benjamin. So they stopped there to spend the night. They rested in the town square, but no one took them in for the night. That evening, so it's dark by now. That evening, an old man came from his work in the fields. He was from the hill country of Ephraim, but he was living in Gibeah, where the people were from the tribe of Benjamin. When he saw the travelers sitting in the town square, he asked them where they were from and where they were going. We have been in Bethlehem in Judah, the man replied. We are on our way to a remote area in the hill country of Ephraim, which is my home. I traveled to Bethlehem and now I'm returning home, but no one has taken us in for the night, even though we have everything we need. We have straw and feed for our donkeys and plenty of bread and wine for ourselves. You are welcome to stay with me, the old man said. I will give you anything you might need, but whatever you do, don't spend the night in the square. The man knew how bad things were, and he was like, whatever you do, get on your donkey and head out, go to the next town, whatever you do, don't spend the night in the square, because there are some bad, he doesn't say it this way. He doesn't say there are bad things that happen here, but he knew bad things happen in the town. He knew this was a corrupt place. And he said, so he took them home and fed the donkeys. After they washed their feet, they ate and drank together. While they were enjoying themselves, a crowd of troublemakers from the town surrounded the house. They began beating at the door and shouting to the old man, bring out the man who is staying with you so we can have sex with him. It says a crowd of troublemakers. As you go on, if you read the next chapter, some translations say the leaders of the town. These men weren't just people who were bystanders, who were just, they only came out at night. They were leaders in the community. Here's what I will tell you. Corrupt leaders will eventually create a corrupt culture where everybody does it. The reason why that man said don't stay in the town square is because he knew the behavior of the people in that town was completely corrupt, and everybody thought it was fine, and they turned look, it's not just one person. It's a crowd of them beating on the door saying, hey. And here's what you need to understand. They weren't just after sexual immorality. They wanted somebody new to impose their sexual immorality on. That's the thing you need to understand. Sin always is seeking a new victim. It is never satisfied for you to be over here and not be involved, and them to be over here and do what they do. What they want to do is group you in with them so that you all are a part of the problem that is going on. Sin is always looking for a new victim. They weren't satisfied to commit sin themselves amongst themselves. They wanted to involve somebody else in the sin that they were involved in. And you may, listen, we're going to talk about this in a few minutes. You may say, well, I would never sit in on that, but I'm not going to say anything about that. What you need to understand is that the people who are involved in corruptive behavior will never be satisfied for you to sit on the sidelines and not participate. They will never be satisfied for you to sit idly by and say it's fine for them to do it, but I'm not going to participate. They're going to come after you because it is their goal to encompass everyone into their corrupt behavior. So here's the question. How bad do things have to get before we do something? At what point do we do something? 2 years ago, is it easy for us to say COVID is just in China? Then it came to Seattle, and then it was New York, and we're like, well, it's just Seattle, and it's just New York, and then it consumed everything that we do. Everything. Look, it wasn't a big deal, right? Nobody was over here going, oh my gracious, I'm scared to death, as long as it was in China. Most of you didn't move as long as it was in some other major city, but the minute that it started affecting your life, you were like, oh my goodness. Everybody didn't have to deal with it at once. It started in one place. Currently, in our world, there's one country invading another one country. And there's nobody in their right mind that believes if that venture is successful, that it's only going to be one country. Nobody in their right mind believes that. And so what we can do is sit over here and say, well, it's just one country. Why should we be concerned? And often that is our response to corruption and cultural sin, is we go, it's just over there. It's just them. It's just that. It's just one instance. And we say nothing. We do nothing. Until eventually it's encompassed the culture and we can't say anything. And here's what I would tell you about those things. You don't go to bed one night with a godly culture and wake up the next morning with an ungodly culture. It doesn't work that way. You don't go to bed one night with without sinful actions and wake up the next morning and poof, everybody is committing sin. The activity didn't just develop in one night. There were single events in this story that had been ignored for so long that it became the norm. It was so normal that the old man said, you can't stay in the town square. The story goes on like this. It says the old man stepped outside to talk to them. No, my brothers, you don't do such an evil thing, for this man is a guest in my house, and such a thing would be shameful. This right here blows my mind. Here, take my virgin daughter and this man's concubine. Listen, even his conscience had been seared enough that he was willing to offer up his daughter and this other man's concubine. He was like, oh, it's shameful. This sin's bad if you're going to take him. But here, take them. I mean, how crazy is that? Right? Do y'all not read this and go, what's the man thinking? What I would tell you is that he had rationalized at least part of the sin. Rape was fine as long as it involved a woman, but it wasn't fine if it involved a man. Moral corruption, cultural problems start because we start accepting this and say, well, I can live with this, but I can't live with that. Then we take another step and say, well, I can live with this, but I can't live with that. He was only part of the way when they were going all the way. He says, I'll bring them out to you, and you can abuse them and do whatever you like. But don't do such a shameful thing to this man. But they wouldn't listen to him, so the Levite, this is why I think he just wanted her for other purposes, not because he loved her. It says, so the Levite took hold of his concubine and pushed her out the door. Now, I shouldn't chuckle, but I mean, I'll be honest with you, this is so absurd to me. Like, I'm like, you almost have to laugh because you can't imagine anything like this going on. We in America talk about, oh, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. If our world's going to hell in a handbasket, they were on a supersonic airplane. Okay? I mean, they were rolling. And he pushed her out the door. The men of the town abused her all night, taking turns raping her until morning. Finally, at dawn, they let her go. At daybreak, the woman returned to the house, so she's not dead yet. At daybreak, the woman returned to the house where her husband was staying. She collapsed at the door of the house and lay there until it was light. When her husband opened the door to leave, there lay his concubine with her hands on the threshold, trying to get in. He said, get up, let's go. The compassion's oozing out of him, right? Get up, let's go. But there was no answer. So he put her body on his donkey and took her home. When he got home, she's dead now, okay? He took a knife and cut his concubine's body into 12 pieces. Then he sent one piece to each tribe throughout all the territory of Israel. Everyone who saw it said, such a horrible crime has not been committed in all the time since Israel left Egypt. Think about it. What are we going to do? And who is going to speak up? That's the question I want to ring in your head today. What are we going to do? And who is going to speak up? The longer you wait to deal with corruption, the higher the cost gets to solve the problem. If you're sick, the longer you wait to see the doctor, the longer the process is to fix the problem. Now, I'm not talking about if you got a cold. But one of the reasons why they want you to get certain tests done at certain times when you get a certain age is the sooner they can catch it, the higher the probability that they're going to be able to deal with it. Ignored and not paid attention to, the cost of resolving the disease goes up. The pain of fixing the disease goes up. The suffering of fixing the disease goes up. The challenge of fixing the disease goes up. And sometimes there's death involved. When it comes to cultural corruption, when it comes to cultural immorality, when it comes to things that are, we are turning an eye to, things that we are becoming numb to, things that 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there are things that are shown on television ads, on YouTube for any age that would not have been allowed when I was 20. You couldn't have seen them. You couldn't have heard some of the words. But we've become so desensitized to certain things that it's like, okay, whatever. It's just normal. Everybody's doing it. Well, let me tell you what everybody was doing in this town. Everybody apparently was showing up to visitors' house, knocking on the door, and raping them all night long. Apparently, that's what everybody was doing. At some point, things will get bad enough that somebody will speak up. But the price is way lower if we speak up early. The price is way lower if we deal with it earlier. The price is way down if we deal with cultural corruption early, if we deal with personal sin early. And as alarmist as it may sound, it's much easier to take a stand when there's multiple people on the right side and one person on the wrong side than it is when there's one person on the right side and multiple people on the wrong side. As people of God, what are we going to do? And who's going to speak up? How long are we going to be silent while things become normal that should not be normal? How long are we going to be quiet while things continue, while we become desensitized to stuff that God never intended for us to be desensitized to? What are we going to do? And who is going to speak up? Our options are to be quiet and then just try to warn people, don't stay in the town square. Don't pull over on the side of the road. Or are we going to speak up and say, hey, that is not right, and we shouldn't be trying to impose it on anybody else? You see, this is the challenge. There's a real tension present because we're going to take communion, and we believe that Jesus Christ died for our sins, and I 100% believe there is grace for every sin. I believe that. I believe he died for my sin. I believe he died for yours. But I also believe that my response to that grace is a life of righteousness, a life of upright living to do what exemplifies the life of Jesus. It's not a license. It's an opportunity for me to show how much I appreciate the grace of God.